So first of all, this is the development of the Australian budget over many years. You will see those huge negative bars below the line, which is the fiscal stimulus package in relation to the global financial crisis. And that era is now officially over, with the government moving back into surplus, and in quite spectacular fashion, if you consider that in the current year they are in deficit a little more than $40 billion, and next year they're going to be plus 1.5. That is a sharp turnaround. It indicates that the government is taking money out of the system, not adding it back, and that's something that everyone else is going to have to deal with and absorb and pedal pretty hard just to stand still, given that the government is pushing pretty hard the other way, trying to repair its own balance sheet. If you look at Australia in an international context though, it's difficult to find the degree of urgency which the government is putting on this particular project. If you look at the amount of debt that the government has out there, as opposed to what their position is in any given year, we are really, really in a strong position. Our debt position is measly, and the countries which are having problems abroad, the Spains, the UKs, etc., they basically got almost a year's worth of income for the whole economy tied up in government debt. That's a lot. We don't. We have less than a fifth, and we're not going to get anywhere near a fifth because things are starting to turn around now. So you can argue that the government is protesting a little bit too much, showing off even. So when the Treasurer goes to a G20 meeting and he can say, yeah, I got a surplus. But we don't particularly need one right now. We do need one at some stage in this cycle, but we've got one this year, and so we need to learn to live with that. How has this been achieved? Well, it's pretty simple. If your revenues are increasing and your expenses are falling, your balance is going to improve very, very substantially. And that is what the government has been able to engineer. What's driving revenue? Well, we've got some new policies. We've got the mining tax, we've got the carbon price. We have many savings measures on superannuation and others, which I will speak about in a moment. And on the expenses side, they've been very frugal in terms of what they've allowed to go out the door. They're putting a big, what they call an efficiency dividend in all the government departments, which basically means job losses. That'll be worth 2.5% on average. They've taken money out of the defence budget, which obviously has big programs in it that if you put a red line through one or two of them, you end up saving a lot of money. And the outcome is, when you also remember that the school building program is no more, and that was a huge outlay in recent years, your investment is also going to fall quite substantially, and you end up with a massive shift in the fiscal balance. And that's what we've got to absorb. Do we think that you can literally take that number and say, that's how much money is leaving the economy? No, we don't. Because it depends very critically on what sort of money you're taking out and what sort of cash you're putting back in. If you take money off a wealthy widow who has frugal needs, she's probably not spending that money at this moment in time. So if you tax it, it's not actually changing economic activity, it's just changing who controls those funds. Whereas if you take money off a working family who is spending every dollar that comes in the door on rent, petrol and groceries, well, you are affecting economic activity, because if you tax them, you are reducing the amount of cash in circulation. So this composition makes a great deal of difference, and the government, by skewing things towards getting a hold of high income earners, very large companies, and giving a few handouts at the other end, that mix means that you need to discount the impact on the overall economy from the 40 billion or so, And it's still material, but not quite as big as it looks on this chart. But the shift is still major, and this is why the onus is on monetary policy. We have two main levers for managing the economic cycle in this country: the budget and interest rates. And the budget is pushing in the tight direction. It's very clear that monetary policy needs to push the other way to get the balance right. In terms of delivering the surplus this year, I know there are a lot of accountants in the audience, and they are raising an eyebrow or two at the way this surplus has been achieved. But it's important to realise that by front-loading a lot of payments, there are obligations that the government has in this year that they just don't have next year, and that is allowing them to pad the 12-13 number very considerably. And one of the keys there is actually the floods in Brisbane. We quickly forget about that sort of thing because it was sort of away from our patch. But the floods in Queensland not only had direct impacts on the budget, obviously, but they have indirect impacts because the economy actually contracted overall in that quarter, whereas the government was expecting it to grow at a steady pace. And that has implications for a number of things, particularly corporate profits, particularly incomes for those who don't get paid if they don't show up to work, and if the factory is not open, you don't get paid. So your income tax receipts fall, and also people make losses under those circumstances, which enables firms to minimise their tax bills. So the floods were a big deal, but they're gone, and that's something that drops out of the numbers. They've front-loaded some stuff on GST payments. They've front-loaded some of the compensation for the carbon price into this year. And all of this, plus the fact that they're keeping the tax thresholds in the same position, but incomes are rising, means that they're just clawing back cash here and there. And once again, that very big line down the bottom, that's the school building program. Very, very big outlays over the last three years, just not there in 12-13. So drops out of the numbers and makes the surplus achievable. And overall, in real terms, so adjusted for inflation, the government is outlaying about 96.5% of what they did the year before. Now, that is pretty stern stuff relative to history. If you go back through the whole history of fiscal policy there, it's a very, very rare thing indeed for government payments to fall in inflation-adjusted terms. Why is it so hard? Because things like health and education just grind forward as the economy grinds forward. And so you really need to make some tricky decisions in terms of what you do with things which are more discretionary than keeping the schools open. So they have made some tough decisions, but they've also been helped, and they've also been very active in managing where their obligations have come to rest.